right, hello everybody and welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Andrea and I'll be your host today. If you're not familiar with what we do here, we bring science, exploration, and conservation into classrooms around the world via virtual field trips. We usually run between 30 to 50 live events a month, so definitely check back in on our website to see if there's any others that interest you. So today, we're doing a very exciting event. We are taking a trip to the Turtle Hospital in the Florida Keys, an area that's home to 5 out of the world's 7 turtle species, sea turtle species. So what they do is they rescue, rehabilitate, and release injured sea turtles back into the wild, in addition to educating the public about the importance of protecting these amazing creatures and advocating for change to protect them. So without further ado, welcome in Turtle Hospital, folks.
Hi! We love being able to teach people about turtles.
And we love having you. I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, plus everybody should love turtles. Okay, so we're start off with one of our first patients who's now hiding, so we're going to come back to Chuck. He doesn't want to be on camera right now, and that's okay. We'll start off with Chomper. So Chomper's one of our patients. He is about a little bit over 100-pound loggerhead. And so loggerheads are one of the more common species that we get, and they get their name because they have a very, very large head, which they need that large head. They need a very strong beak because they are carnivores. So they anything with a hard shell. So crab, lobster, conch. So really hard things. But Chomper came in just about 2 months ago. He was found with tumors, which tumors are something that our sea turtles get. It's caused by a virus called fiber papilloma. We call it FP for short, but it all has to do with water pollution. And so most commonly it's found in green sea turtles, which I'll show you those in a few minutes. But he's one of the few loggerheads that we have seen with it. But when he came in, he had a 14-pound tumor attached to his right front flipper. That thing was larger than a basketball. It was massive. Let me grab a picture of it for you. So that's what he looked like when he came in. He was a mess. Not really sure how he was able to swim because he couldn't move that flipper. He could barely move at all. But luckily, one of the local boaters down here found him kind of struggling with that. They were able to get him up on their boat. And that's actually how he got the name Chomper, because as they were trying to help him and try to rescue him, he kept trying to bite his rescuers. Because unfortunately, they don't always know that what we're trying to do is help. They just know, hey, I don't like you. Leave me alone. I hurt. But that's how he got the name Chomper, because he loves to chomp. But we brought him in. We did surgery. We tried to remove the flipper, but still save the flipper. But unfortunately, the tumor had caused so much damage to that right front flipper that there wasn't anything we could do, and we ended up having to amputate that right front flipper. But that is okay. He can still survive perfectly fine on his own in the wild with only 3 flippers. He'll always look a little bit different. Think of a 3-legged dog, but still be able to do everything normal. He just has to learn how to adapt, which so far he's doing really, really well. So right now he's just getting wound care on that amputation site. And then once that heals up a little bit more, and he gets a little bit stronger, then we'll be able to do surgery again and remove his other tumors. And then he'll stay for a few months, give him a chance to get nice and strong and healthy again, build up the antibodies, which will build up an immunity to that virus. And then once he's tumor-free for a while, then he'll go home. So he'll be with us for at least the next 8 or 9 months. It's not always a very fast process. But at least he's here, and he's got a chance now, because with the size of that tumor, he would not have ended very well. But to kind of give you an idea of what the tumors also look like, this is one of our little green sea turtle patients. This is Herman. And you might notice that even though he's called a green turtle, he's not actually green. And that's true because the green sea turtles are actually brown, but they are herbivores. So in the wild, they eat seagrass and algae, and they eat so much of that green stuff that their fat and their insides turn green. So it's kind of like you are what you eat. But Herman just came in over the weekend. He just came in on Saturday, so one of our more recent turtles. But he's got tumors on his eyes, around his neck, on his flippers, because that's where those tumors like to grow. They like to grow on the soft tissues. So it's very, very rare that you'll see them around the shell. But because of where they do grow, which is on the eyes and around their flippers, it does make it hard for these turtles to see or to swim. And so that's why they need to come in so we can remove those tumors. And Herman here was also hooked by a fish hook, which is actually how they caught him. So he's not so bad with the tumors yet, not anywhere close to Chomper, but kind of in a lucky way, he was hooked by that fisherman and hooked with that fish hook, so they were able to get him and bring him in. But luckily the fish hook didn't cause any damage, but we'll just work on getting those tumors removed. But for right now, just sleeping. In a lot of ways, they're like us. Is that when we get sick, we get very weak and tired, and we just want to sleep all day. Well, same thing for the turtles. And then once they start feeling better, that's when they start getting more and more active. And we can kind of use that as kind of an idea of how the turtle is feeling. That's not exactly like we can ask them how they're feeling for the day, or if they're feeling better or worse than yesterday, or where it hurts. So we go based off of their behavior and their activity level, plus how they're eating. Okay, Chuck has come over. Chuck here is about a 120-pound loggerhead. And so he came in at the end of August. He was found entangled in some fishing line. And so that entanglement, that fishing line was wrapped so tightly around his right front flipper that it had cut off the circulation. So by the time he came in, that flipper was pretty much dead. So we had to amputate, but that's okay. He'll still be able to be released. If you watch him swim, he's not having any problems. He just has to heal up just a little bit more, probably just another month or so, and then he'll be able to be released. Because typically when they have amputations, typically it's 4 months or so. Sometimes a little bit sooner, sometimes a little bit longer, but right around 4 months. So he's doing good. And of course, that all depends on what's wrong with the turtle as to how long they need to stay. Sometimes they're only here for a month or two. Sometimes it's closer to 6 months. Sometimes it's closer to a year. And then some, like Kiki, when she came in, she had tumors, but she's already had 3 surgeries now. So she is now tumor-free, doing amazingly well. But we still want to keep her for just a couple months, make sure that she does build up that immunity to that virus. But that's why she's so active, because she's feeling better. It's also why she has a toy in her tank. That's what that PVC pipe is. That's a toy. Because in the wild, they're used to having rocks and ledges and reefs. So things that they can hide under or sleep under, rub their shells up against. When they're here, can't always give them rocks and ledges, so we give them PVC pipe instead. So they'll push it around, kind of like what she's doing now, or they'll hide underneath it, or they'll scratch their shell up against it. But she's just playing. But they're not going to play like dogs. They're not going to play fetch. Unfortunately, sea turtles don't do that, partly because they are solitary. So they do not travel in groups. So the movie Finding Nemo lied. They don't meet their parents. They don't go traveling the currents together. And so that's why when they're here and they are sick and we need to keep them by themselves, they're okay with that because they're used to being by themselves. They don't get lonely. And then even when we do put them together, they tend to just ignore each other. They're not mean, but they're not exactly friends either. They just don't care. But yeah, very pretty turtle. She's about 70 pounds, which is still relatively young for green sea turtles. Eventually, she'll get to be about 500 pounds, just about 5 feet long, and about 70 to 100 years old. And one of the cool things with sea turtles is that they never stop growing. So the only way to really guesstimate their age is based off of their size. So the larger the turtle, the older they are. So a turtle that's 70 pounds, like Kiki, is probably about 12 to 15 years old. So a little bit older, kind of almost a teenager. Whereas a turtle like Rob, who's only 20 pounds, is probably only 6 or 8 years old. He's much smaller. Rob is very cute, but Rob is kind of a repeat offender, which doesn't happen very often. So our goal is to get these turtles healthy, release them, but we always tag them when they get released. So they'll get a little microchip in the back of their neck, just like microchipping your dog. And then if they're big enough, they'll also get a flipper tag, which is a little metal tag attached to the backside of each front flipper. So that way, if they do pop up, we know who they are. And so for Rob here, he originally popped up back last year, last October. He swallowed a fish hook. Like apparently he was hanging around the fishermen. He wanted to go after the bait, so he got hooked. So brought him in. We removed the fish hook, got him nice and healthy, released him, and then he just popped up a few weeks ago with another fish hook. So that's not really a good sign, especially when they're having the same problems again and again. But the first time and the second time, he originally popped up a little bit further north in the state, up at Loggerhead Marine Life Center, which is up in Juneau Beach, a little bit north of us. So they kind of don't want to release him again right in that same area because clearly it did not work out that well the first time. So they transferred him down to us down here in the Keys so that way we can finish up his rehab, but then most likely he'll get released down here. And then hopefully, kind of a change of scenery, he'll find other stuff to do and won't hang out around the fishermen, won't get hooked by a fish hook again. At least that's kind of the goal. But we'll see what happens. Some turtles are just kind of special. But that's okay. We're going to take care of him anyways. But most of our turtles aren't transfers like him. Most of them come from right around the Keys. Because the Keys here were a string of islands, a little bit more than 100 miles long. So lots and lots of ocean, which means lots and lots of sea turtles. And so it's typically the boaters and the fishermen, so the people that are out there on the water, they see a turtle that just doesn't look normal, and then they call us. And then one of our rehab staff is always on call. We have an ambulance, and we'll go out and pick that turtle up. Or if the boat is close enough, they can come right here into our docks. Today, there's not too many boats out there on the water. We've got a cold front moving in, so it's a little windy. It's like 20-mile-an-hour winds today, and a little bit cold, at least for us. The high today is only 78, which is chilly for us. We don't like it when it gets into the 70s. And neither do the turtles. The turtles like it when it's nice and warm. And then we also have our big pool here. So our big pool, this is where our non-releasable turtles live. Because yes, even though we do want to release as many of these turtles as we can, we also know that if they can't survive on their own in the wild, then we're not going to do that. So they're going to stay here. And so they get this big, huge 160,000 gallon saltwater tidal pool for them to live in because it is connected directly to the ocean. So it's tidal and there's fish. It's pretty much as natural a pool as we can make. So we do have a a bunch of these guys in here, which these are all greens. So they are the herbivores. And most of them have what's known as bubble butt syndrome, which is what happens when they get hit by a boat. And that boat strike causes air to get trapped, it causes nerve damage, which that means that these turtles now float, which floating in a sea turtle is not normal. Cannot release a floating turtle. So they have to stay here because here it's not a problem if they float. We're not going to let them starve or have any other problems. But that's why most of these guys float, and it's typically they float butt up, which is why the bubble butt kind of makes sense. But we still want to make them comfortable. So while they're here, we attach lead weight to the outside of their shell. So a lot of these guys have grayish circles along their butts, and those are weights. So that way when they want to, they can go down to the bottom and go to sleep. It's just that eventually those weights fall off. So then they're back to floating. So even with the weights, they still cannot be released. Because once you release a sea turtle, they are not ever coming back. Especially not for a checkup. Because, like I said with Rob, it's rare but we get repeats. But they're all hanging out here in the corner at the moment. They're kind of fruitcakes in that regard. But remember, they are solitary in the wild. So when you put them together like this, if you watch them, they're not mean, but they also don't care. There is no concept of social etiquette or personal space. Definitely no social distancing going on. But that's okay. They just ignore each other. And so those guys, they all have bubble butt. But this guy, this is Montel. He's one of our two non-releasables that does not have bubble butt. He's had everything else. So hit by a boat, bit by a shark, entangled in fishing line, and he's had tumors. So he's missing half of his right front flipper, all of his left front flipper, his right eye, and his shell is dented on his left side. So he's had a rough life. But in order to be released, they need 3 full functioning flippers, just like Chuck and Chomper. As long as they have 3, they can adapt and they do fine. But Montel only has 2.5 flippers and 1 eye, so not very fast, unable to be released. So he does great here, because in here he doesn't have to worry about boats or sharks or even finding his own food. He doesn't have to be fast. He just gets to hang out with everybody else. And then our other non-bubble butt, that's that big guy right there. That's April. April is blind. He came in April 1st, 1991. He had tumors covering both of his eyes. In the process of removing those tumors, he lost most of his vision. So he can see shadows, but not well enough to be released. So we do have him trained to come to a sound for feeding time. And then we use a pair of tongs and we hand feed him. And the really cool thing about April is that April is a boy. Because it's typically the people that find them that get to name them. And when they're younger, when they're smaller, you can't tell just by looking at them if they're boys or girls. So sometimes they do get the wrong names, which is how we end up with April, who's a boy. We also have George, who's a girl. But they don't care. They're not like dogs. They don't respond to their names. Their names are really just for us. But you can really only tell when they're little is by doing surgery and looking inside, seeing what parts they have, or you wait until they're adults, typically about 20, 25 years old. Then, if they're a boy, they get a long tail. It's eventually up to about 13 inches or so in length. Whereas if they're a girl, tail stays really short, doesn't go past the end of their shell. So April has that longer tail now, so April, definitely a boy. But that's okay. We love him anyways. But all the little guys like Smalls there's no way of knowing. But if we don't need to do surgery, It's not going to affect their care in any way. So we're just sometimes unknown, at least until they're a little bit bigger and they're adults, and then we have to be very careful as to whether or not we put the males and the females together. Because like Kent, big turtle, adult sized, little itty bitty short tail, so Kent is a girl. Okay, let's do some questions.
All right, thank you so much. I learned so much myself, and I'm sure lots of our classes have questions. So let's bring in Madame Howard's grades 4 and 5s from Ottawa. Do you guys have a question you'd like to ask?
Yes, we do.
All right, let's hear it.
How many turtles do you save every single year?
Well, every year we typically get in about 100 turtles. So far this year, it's a little bit lower than average. We're up to 70, which lower turtles is not a bad thing. We don't necessarily want more turtles. So 70 for the year. Currently, we have 32. So we still have a fair number.
All right, awesome. Let's bring in Miss Collins' 5th grade class from Rhinebeck, New York. Do you guys have a question you'd like to ask?
Step in front of the camera so they see it.
Once somebody finds the injured turtle, how far do you have to go and find it? To go get it?
Well, it varies because the Florida Keys were the string of islands down at the very south end of Florida. So the southernmost part of the United States is Key West. So that's about 50 miles from us. And then we're still about 50 miles from the mainland. And so we cover all of that distance. So anywhere in the Keys, any turtles that get sick come to us. And then we'll pretty much take them from anywhere around this area. So sometimes we'll drive all the way to Key West or all the way up to Key Largo. And then sometimes, for Rob, we had to actually drive up to the mainland to pick him up because they drove him south and we drove up a little bit, kind of met in the middle. And then some of our turtles are found right near shore, they're found in somebody's canal, or sometimes they're 20 miles offshore. So it all depends on where the people are and where that turtle is found. But we don't mind. Any turtle that gets sick in this area, we'll find some way to bring them in.
Definitely challenging work, but totally worth it to save the turtles. Let's bring in Miss Hatum's 2s and 3s from Ottawa. Do you guys have a question you'd like to ask?
How many types of food do turtles eat?
What was that?
What types of food do turtles eat?
Well, what they eat depends on what type of turtle they are. So these green sea turtles eat green stuff. So in the wild, that's seagrass and algae. Here, that's romaine, lettuce, kale, green peppers, cucumbers, pretty much any sort of veggie we can get our little fingers on. Whereas the loggerheads, like Chuck and Chomper, they eat the crab, the lobster, the conch in the wild because they like that hard shell. Whereas here, when they're sick, we can't always give them that hard shell. We want to make it easier for them to digest. So they still get meat. It's just squid and fish. Just like for you, when you get sick, you get chicken soup. You don't get a big steak dinner. Let's see. Because we've got Brianna popping up. Brianna's one of our loggerheads. And she's a really pretty turtle. She's about 160 pounds. She's got bubble butt. But see that big head, that big beak? That's how they're able to bite through the crab and the lobster and even the conch. Because I do not suggest you biting through a lobster. You would hurt yourself. It would not end very well. But she's got that nice strong beak, a lot of muscles in her head, and that's how she's able to do it. But she thinks she's going to get fed now. Brianna's one of our non-releasables. She's got bubble butt. And she knows in the afternoon she gets fed. But it's not dinner time just yet. She still has another hour or so.
Aw,
But
she's
they eat on
adorable.
average about 1% to 3% of their body weight a day.
All right, let's see. Does our Meadowlane school have a question?
Do turtles feel pain in their shells?
Kind of. They don't feel pain the same way we do, just because their brains are built a lot different than ours. So Brianna here, she's 160 pounds, so pretty good sized turtle. Her brain's only about the size of an adult's thumb. So it's a lot smaller than ours, or what you might expect. And so in that way, it just doesn't work the same way. They just don't feel things the same way. But they do have feeling in their shell. So think about rubbing your fingernail, how you can feel that. Well, that's what they feel. And that's why with a lot of these turtles, that's why we do give them toys. Like Conleche here has some little floating toys because he likes being able to scratch his shell. Just like with dogs. Some of them like being scratched, some of them do not.
All right, super awesome questions so far, guys. I'll choose a few from YouTube and then we'll do some more rounds for our classroom spots. So this is a really good question. What is the most serious injury you've seen and the longest time you've had a turtle?
The most serious, it kind of varies because like Chomper was crazy. We've never seen a tumor that large, and we're pretty sure nobody has ever seen a tumor that large. So that was kind of interesting, especially trying to figure out how to do his surgery. We were really, really hoping we'd be able to save that flipper, but unfortunately it didn't happen. But a lot of the times, the most serious injuries, yes, are things like boat strikes, but also when they have multiple things wrong with them, like Montel, the one in the main pool that had everything other than bubble butt. So when he came in, he was a mess. So instead of just having to fix one thing, we had to fix multiple things. And then Gumby is sleeping. Like Gumby is one of our more recent turtles, and was hit by a boat. Let's see if I can get him. And so he's got some they're healing now, but pretty severe boat strikes down the back of his shell. That's why he now has those marks. And so he is a very, very lucky turtle, because if those had gone any further forward and gotten his head, he'd be dead. Or if they'd gone any deeper, it would have punctured his lungs and his intestines and he'd be dead. But luckily, it managed to just be enough to, of course, cause him injury, but not enough that he would be dead. So he's very, very lucky, and he's healing. He still probably has just a few more months, but he'll always have some scars on his back. But that's okay. Scars are part of growing up. Happens to the best of us. But for right now, he's just sleeping. But he has only been here. He was transferred down with Rob last week. So he's only been in rehab for a little bit over a month. But our longest turtle is the original Bubble Butt. He is in this big pool. I'm going to see if I can find him. That guy, that's Rebel. Rebel's been here since, 1991? He's been with us for a while. Bubble Butt, the original, he's in here. He's been here since 1989, and he is our longest resident. But he is being stubborn at the moment. He is not up. He's not going to come up to say hi. And he does that sometimes. It's hard to make a sea turtle do something that they don't want to do.
All right, so we have another question sort of tailing off of the several human impacts that you've mentioned that harm the turtles. Is the high incidence of tumors and flippers related to pollution in the ocean?
Yes. We're still trying to figure out exactly how, but it's primarily the juvenile greens that get the tumors. because the juvenile greens are the ones that live near shore in the seagrass beds, which is where the water pollution, the runoff, is the greatest. Plus, the seagrass are kind of the natural filters for the ocean. So they take in the polluted water, clean it up, and then release cleaner water. And then these turtles come along and eat it. Plus, when they're juveniles, their immune systems are not nearly as strong as when you're adults. That's why you're more likely to get sick when you're children. But exactly if it's something that's directly caused by water pollution, or if it's just that the water pollution just weakens the turtle's immune system enough to allow those tumors to grow, that's something that we're still trying to figure out. Because if it was something specific in the pollution, you would find more localized kind of hot spots of the virus. But this virus is now worldwide. Anywhere that there's sea turtles, you're going to find some evidence of these tumors. Like little Birdie here. She came in back in April, and when she came in, she was a mess. She had tumors everywhere. She was skinny. She just did not look very good. But now, she's been tumor-free for a few months. Her color's come back. She's nice, healthy body weight, very active, eating great. So it's kind of fun being able to watch them as they improve. But now that she's strong now, she's built up those antibodies to that virus. Now she's built up an immunity, and we're trying to get her ready to be released. So within the next month or so, hopefully, she'll be gone. But there's still a lot about the virus that we don't know. Because every time we do a study, we may answer 1 or 2 questions, but then end up with 10 more questions. But that's kind of the way it goes with research. So there's always more to learn, which is never a bad thing.
For sure. Maybe some of our students in the audience might want to study that when they grow up.
Oh, yes.
Great. We have one more question from the YouTube comments, and then I'll go back to our classrooms. How far can turtles swim?
Far. So it all kind of depends on the turtle. So the only time sea turtles ever have to be somewhere is during nesting season, and that's really only if they're female, because they return to the same beach that they were hatched from to lay their eggs. But other than that, they pretty much go anywhere they want. You'll find sea turtles anywhere that it's warm and anywhere that there's food. So pretty much every ocean other than the Arctic oceans. And so we have been able to track sea turtles for thousands of miles, but it all depends on each turtle as to where they want to go. So we actually participate in a project with the Sea Turtle Conservancy every year. And so it's kind of a little mock race. So it's called Tour des Turtles. So instead of Tour de France, it's tourdesturtles.org. It runs every year from the beginning of August to the end of October. And so they tag turtles throughout Florida and Central America and the Caribbean and see how far they go. Now the turtles don't know that they're in a race. They're just kind of going out their regular lives, but it's a really neat way to get people involved, and especially students and kids involved, because you want to root for your turtle. So the race just ended a couple weeks ago. We had released a turtle. Her name was Maisie, right here off of Marathon. And then she did not go very far. She went just past Key West. So in like 3 months, she only went, it was, I think she ended up at like 300 miles, which is nothing. The winner was almost 1,000 miles, which is why Maisie also ended up in last place. But that's okay. We may not have gotten any prizes for winning, but it's still good information to know. So if it is something that you are interested, you can go online, tourdesturtles.org, because even though the race is over, they continue tracking the turtles until the tags fall off, which typically they last about a year, maybe a year and a half. So even though Maisie didn't win, we'll still kind of keep an eye on her and see where she's going.
All right, super cool stuff. Let's bring in Madame Howard's class to ask another question.
How many types of viruses are there?
So how many different types of viruses or injuries have you guys encountered?
Well, most of their injuries are not really virus related. The main virus that they get, of course, is that fibropapilloma. Most of their problems are actually human related. So it's boat strikes, it's entanglements, it's getting eating fish hooks or just eating trash and plastic to begin with. There are a few viruses like the FP. They'll also get some like upper respiratory viruses. They are kind of prone to harmful algae blooms like red tide and certain types of parasites that are sort of a little bit more nature related, but most of their injuries are human related. And then even like we do have 2 little guys, which it's no longer nesting season, so we don't have any babies. We just have 2 that are just about a year old. So that's Lucy, and then we have Ethel, and these are year-old loggerheads. So quite a bit smaller. Let's see if I can get my hand down there without her trying to bite me. So to kind of give you an idea of how big she is. But yeah, trying to bite me. Don't stick your hands anywhere near wild animals, guys. Never works out very well. But we get these little hatchlings when they're only about 2 to 3 inches long when they don't make it to the ocean by themselves. So sometimes they'll get stuck at the bottom of their nest, or in a lot of cases, they'll actually end up walking the wrong direction. They get distracted by light. And so this summer we had to pull quite a few out of swimming pools because they went the wrong direction and just ended up swimming. But that's not where they're supposed to be. Well, doesn't end up very well. But Lucy and Ethel, they're what we call our Head Start program. They'll stay with us for about another year, give them a chance to get a lot bigger, a lot stronger, a lot healthier, so that way when they do get released, they'll have a much better chance of survival.
All right, cool. Let's bring in Ms. Hatum's class again. Do you guys have a question you'd like to ask?
What is its main predator?
Well, their main predators all depends on how big they are. So when they're first born, they're only 2 to 3 inches long. So much smaller than even Ethel is right now. And when they're that little, they're kind of bite-sized. So everything wants to eat them. Birds, fish, sharks, you name it. By the time that Ethel here gets released next year, she'll be about 20, 25 pounds. So still have to worry about sharks, but at least at that size, she won't have to worry about birds or fish anymore. And then even once they get bigger, like over like Chuck and Chomper size, like over 100 pounds, even then, most sharks aren't going to bother because the bigger they are, the harder they are, the harder it is for them to eat. And most sharks are pretty opportunistic. They want easy prey. They don't want to make it harder on themselves. Okay, and real quick, this guy, this is the original Bubble Butt. Told you he was hiding earlier, but he finally decided to wake up and show himself. So this is our longest resident. This is the original Bubble Butt. He's been here since 1989. So he's kind of the one that started this whole thing. And that's how he got the name Bubble Butt Syndrome, is from him. As he came in, he was found floating butt up, so they named him Bubble Butt. And then once we started seeing more turtles with the same problem, that's when it became named Bubble Butt Syndrome. So now he is famous. And he'll still be with us for a while because their average lifespan is about 70 to 100 years.
You heard it here, everyone. We have a celebrity in our midst today. All right, let's get another question from Ms. Collins' class.
If turtles breathe air when they have bubble butt? Does that make them harder for them to breathe air if their backs are floating up?
It all depends on how severe the bubble butt is, but most of the time, not really. They just may sometimes just have to work just a little bit harder. So let me see. Who do I have that their weights have just recently fallen off? And for most turtles, if they're not moving, then yes, their butt is up and they not quite vertical. But yeah, let's see. That's Toby. So his weight just fell off. That's why he's got that little section on the back that's a little bit different color. So yeah, he floats kind of butt up a little bit more now. So yes, if he just kind of sat there, his head is down and his butt is up. But they don't have a diaphragm like we do, so they have to use their pectoral muscles to breathe. So they are always going to be moving those front flippers when they come up to take a breath anyways. So when it is time for him to breathe, he's going to be swimming and kind of moving along. And when they're moving, they can get themselves a little bit more horizontal. They can even themselves out a little bit more. The biggest problem with the bubble butt is that if they're up at the top floating and all of their food is at the bottom, and that's true whether they're green and they eat plants or they're a carnivore and they eat crab and lobster, all of that food is going to be at the bottom. So if they're stuck up at the top and their food's at the bottom, that doesn't work out too well. And that's the biggest problem with the bubble butt, is that eventually they'll just starve. Because even if they are able to get to the bottom, the amount of energy to get down there and stay down there will kind of outweigh any energy that they get from their food.
All right. Let's take a question from Meadowlane School now.
How many turtles have you guys saved?
A lot. We've been here since 1986, so 30 years now. In that time, we've released over 2,000 turtles. So it's a lot of turtles every year.
All right, amazing. Super great questions so far, guys. I think we have time for just one more question from each of our classroom spots before we wrap up. So, Madame Howard, do you have a question you'd like to ask? I think you need to unmute for us, sorry.
So how many turtles do you have in the big pool that live there permanently?
Yeah, so our big pool here, which is where our non-releasables live, there is 19, maybe 20 of them. Because it all depends on the type of turtle and the size of the turtle as to how many you can put together. So most of our turtles are these either large juveniles or the small subadults. But if we had a bunch that were like April-sized, April's like 180 pounds, then we'd be able to have a lot less. But most of them are kind of chance size there. Chance is about 55, 60 pounds.
All right. Ms. Hajunska?
How many species of turtles are there in the world?
Well, there's 7 species throughout the entire world. So 5 of the species are found right around Florida. The other 2 are the olive ridleys, which are over in the Pacific Ocean in kind of the southern Atlantic, so not around Florida. And then the Australian flatbacks, which are only near Australia. And so far you guys have met the loggerheads and the greens, which are the most common around Florida. There are also the leatherbacks, which are the really, really big guys. They get to be 2,000 pounds, but we don't see them very often. They typically live offshore in the middle of the ocean. And then, of course, the hawksbill sea turtles, which are the ones that have that very pretty tortoiseshell pattern on their shell, which is why they're now critically endangered. But they're typically only found near coral reefs. And then the last species is called the Kemp's ridley, which we do have one, except she's sitting down there at the bottom. She, at the moment, looks like a rock. But I promise that big dark spot down there is not a rock, that's a turtle. But Bender is very shy. She does not always come up to say hi. But the Kemsridleys are also known as the ghost turtles because they're much lighter in color than everybody else because they're kind of made to kind of blend in to this muddy, sandy bottom.
All right, super cool stuff. Ms. Collins' class, do you guys have one last question you'd like to ask?
Oh yeah. What do the tumors exactly do to the turtles?
Yeah, so the tumors, they are vascular. So they do have a blood supply, which means that when a turtle has tumors, whether it's just one or one big one like Chomper or a bunch of little ones like Herman, it means that blood goes to the tumor instead of towards the turtle. So it just kind of weakens their overall body condition. So like here's Herman again. So he's got those tumors around his flippers and on his eyes. But his aren't super large yet. So he's kind of very, very lucky that he was hooked by that fisherman because his tumors are not yet to the point where they're affecting him at least nearly as much, because eventually those tumors, they continue to grow. So eventually they're going to grow very large over the eyes, which then they can't see, or they grow large around their flippers, which then they can't move. If you can't move and you can't see, you can't eat. So a lot of times these turtles come in very sick and they're very skinny, haven't eaten in a while. And so it just kind of makes it hard. And so, yes, eventually it's not that the tumors themselves will kind of kill the turtles. It's that all of the secondary effects from the tumors will kill the turtle. That's why, like, Chuck here, Chuck is a very lucky turtle that he was found. Because who knows how much longer he would have been able to survive with something the size of a basketball attached to him.
Yeah, they're very, very lucky to have you guys to help them.
Always.
Last but not least, let's take a question from our Meadowlane school.
Another question from Meadowlane?
Someone go.
Go ahead.
Have you ever met a turtle with its heart out of its shell?
Not really, because a turtle like that wouldn't be able to survive. Because their shell is bone. So it is a part of them. It would be like for even people. Like if you get born with your heart outside of your body, you kind of have to go to the hospital right away because you're not going to survive. And so that would be the kind of the same thing with turtles. And with sea turtles, if they have that much of a deformity or something wrong with them, typically there's other things wrong as well, so they won't even get to the point where they would hatch out of their egg. They would just kind of die while they were still as an embryo.
All right, great questions today, everybody. I think our time is up here, so thank you so much to Teresa and the Turtle Hospital for teaching us all about turtles and the amazing conservation work you do there. And thank you to all of our classrooms joining us from camera seats as well as YouTube and Facebook. I'll bring you guys all in to say goodbye.
Everybody wave.
It was great having everyone today. Have a good rest of your day. And that is a wrap.